Chapter 4. Larrabee wins his bet. He went to the door and called down. There was a sound of horses snorting in the rainfall outside, and presently a cluster of 5 men climbed the stairs in answer to the call. The 3 Gloucester boys came first. They had answered with all speed the summons from the house of the sheriff. Behind them came Mississippi Slim with his guard. The sheriff greeted the Gloucester boys with a word of thanks for their promptness. "We got a bad ride ahead of us," he said. "This is the work the gent we're after done." He pointed to the body of Benton. "And the man that done it has taken the west road. We'll start right away. Chris, you stay here and keep everybody out of this room." "Wait a minute." He turned and eyed Mississippi Slim. The latter was moving stealthily about the room, with his head thrust forward and bent low. He was oddly like a sniffing dog. "Slim," called the sheriff. Slim whirled, as if at the sound of a shot. He had been leaning over the chest full of papers. "You had your fire near the road. See anybody passing tonight?" Slim raised one finger. "What was he like?" "Bad looking, on a grey hoss." "Know anything about him?" "Nope." "Did he say anything?" "Nothing much." "Talk out, Slim." "What did he say?" "Asked me why I didn't come down here and get a handout and a bed. I said it couldn't be done, because the lady didn't waste no time on gents that was wandering on the road looking for work." Here Mrs. Zeller snorted her contempt. "But this gent on the grey hoss allowed that he'd get a handout and a bunk. Said he'd see if he couldn't get treated right. Did he come onto this house, then?" "I dunno." "You didn't follow him?" "Follow him? Let my fire go out." Slim shook his head in wonder at such a thought. The sheriff turned on Gus. "That door was locked when you came up." "Yep, it sure was, and I busted it in," he said defiantly. "Ask Ma if I didn't." "Where's the key?" "I dunno." "I didn't look for it." "Look on the floor," said the sheriff, himself joining the search. "Whether that door was locked from the inside or the outside makes a pile of difference. The floor of the hall and the floor of the room revealed no key." The sheriff desisted from the search and gave his final directions. "You stay here, Chris, and you hold Slim." "Why?" asked Slim. "What I got to do with all this killing?" "You're a material witness. You'll get chuck and a free bunk." "Ain't that good enough for you?" "We got good enough bunks to suit anybody in the jail." "Jail?" Slim exclaimed. His rat eyes jerked from face to face and then became fixed on the floor, while a violent shiver ran through his meager body, but he said no more. "And get in touch with the coroner, tell him to get his men down here, first thing," went on the sheriff to Chris. "We'll hit the trail, boys." "Now that he's clean gone," put in Mrs. Zeller malevolently. The sheriff turned on her with a mild and curious glance, but the effect of it was to make her wince and change color. Then the men passed on out of the room. The Gloucester boys, Pete, and Bob and Jerry, were first in the saddle, with Judd Larrabee and his father following after, but, as the former started down the road to the west, the sheriff called him back. "Where you going?" he asked. "Why, Follow the trail, I guess. You think he went that way? Why not? If he's got any sense at all, he knows that Mrs. Zeller's seen the way he started, and the first thing he'll do'll be to switch off. Which way, then? What do you see? Asked the sheriff. Look around through the rain. What do you see? The storm had fallen away to a faint misting, but still it blanketed the landscape. Indeed, nothing could have been visible, had it not been for the high-riding moon that was itself unseen, but served to outline the rain clouds in varying shades of deep gray and black. Don't see nothing, said the sheriff's son, except the mountains, yonder. I can just make them out. Then, said the sheriff complacently, that's where he's gone, and we'll go the same way. Chris. His other son came a pace closer. Start using that telephone, said his father. Get Boomtown and tell the Central there to spread the description of Jack around. Get old Miller in Boomtown, too, and tell him to get to work, talking. That's the best thing he does, anyway. Goodbye, boy. Once underway, he made up for his seeming inactivity in the house of the Zellers. He was a heavier weight than the younger men, and his horse, an old buckskin campaigner, was inferior in speed to the mounts of the rest, and yet, before they had gone half a mile, the sheriff was in the lead, pushing his horse along with such skill that it seemed he could sense through the dark the obstacles that came in his way. Where the others floundered 6 times, the wise-footed buckskin slipped once. The first excitement wore off with the posse, too, but the sheriff seemed to be spurred on by a steady and unflagging interest that kept his head high and his eyes straining on through the dark. The gray of dawn, which found them in the foothills, following trails that began to wind with the contours of the land, discovered the sheriff as agile of eye as ever and cheerfully examining the hills and the trees as they passed along. The others awakened, also, as the day began. A freshening north wind chopped the sheeted storm clouds into thin drifts that served to shut the sun out, but allowed most of its light to sift through. In this invigorating air the sleepless quintet kept on until presently the sheriff raised his hand. Now, he said, I figure it's about time for us to look about. His followers had been very prone to beat up every thicket along the way, and they were quite disgusted by the careless methods of their guide and leader. To their minds 1,000 men might have hidden along the way and laughed as the posse went by on a wild goose chase. The sheriff had chosen to stop on the top of a bare hill, with the bare country all around him. Why waste time here? They conveyed their ideas bluntly and immodestly. The more so since the sheriff scratched the stubble on his chin, a faraway look in his eyes, while they talked and seemed to be almost persuaded at every other word. What he said at length was, "Are you hungry, boys?" "Sure," was the chorus. "So's Jack," said the sheriff. His followers glanced at one another in disgust, and Jud Larrabee flushed with shame. Certainly the old man was growing old and simple. He glared defiantly at the Gloucester boys. But it certainly was a very foolish remark, this reference to the appetite of Jack. What had that to do with a manhunt, the appetite of the hunted? "He's hungry," said the leader, "and most like he's smelled the bacon going up in smoke, yonder." There were 3 or 4 streaks of smoke in view, very dimly perceptible against the gray of the sky. "Nothing like the sight of smoke to make a gent uncommon hungry," went on the sheriff. "Let's start on, urged his son uncomfortably. We can talk on the way. On the way to what? Asked his father gently. Let's make that out, first. That's what I'd like to know, burst out Judd. Looks to me like we're all wrong. Who'd ride this way, clean out into the open, if he was hunting shelter? Maybe he wouldn't, said the sheriff. It's just my guess. But, if you don't do no guessing, you don't catch no men at the end of the trail. I figure Jack pictures us riding hard along the west trail. He's come up here to the hills. He's got a lot of hours ahead of us, he's thinking. So he comes over the hill, here, with a raging, tearing hunger, and he can't help stopping to eat. Now, first thing is, where'd he go to eat? There's the biggest smoke, yonder, said Judd, very miserable, but striving to seem as if he took his father seriously. All the time he was wretchedly conscious of the smiles of the Gloucester boys. That's the biggest smoke, admitted the sheriff, and that's the one he wouldn't go to. That little house over the hill would be the place that a gent would run for, unless he was professional and had done murders before. Ain't that just what he is? Asked Pete Gloucester. Ain't that what Benton called him at sight? A murderer? Nope, he called Jack a killer. They's a pile of difference. Jack's an amateur. What? Sure. He turned his trick before he made sure the other folks was in bed. He took a room in the house, when he could have pretended he had to keep on his way, and so he could have ridden off and come back and done the job with nobody knowing. Nope, Jack's an amateur. Killers don't pick out old men. Jack needed money and needed it bad. He started to get it. He choked the old man, not with no pleasure, but because it had to be done. And then, when the old boy screeched, he picked up a piece of wood and batted him over the head. That was plain clumsy. Why? A professional wouldn't have trusted to choking. He'd have used a touch of the knife. Nothing like a knife for neat, silent work, and dead men don't come back to life and start hollering. So I think Jack's an amateur, for that and other reasons. And, being an amateur, I'll just lay you boys even that he's in that little old house over the hills yonder, or has been there. I'll take you for 20, said Jerry Gloucester instantly. And me, chimed in Pete and Bob. Then the cavalcade started forward at a gallop toward the house. They dipped over the hill and came upon a wretched little cottage leaning up the slope. A woman came to the door at their call, wiping her hands on her apron. "Morning," called the sheriff. "We're trying to catch up with our pal. That gent on the gray hoss that was here a while back." "Which way did he go?" "Right on over the hill, there," she answered, pointing. "Funny he didn't say nothing about the rest of you coming along, though. We got a surprise party for him, in a way of speaking," said the sheriff. "How long ago did he start?" "About half an hour." "Thanks." With a glance the sheriff gathered up his posse, and they started on. The silence behind Henry Larrabee was a tremendous thing. It set him smiling, as he rode to the top of that hill to which the woman had pointed. There he drew rein again. Below, lower hills tumbled this way and that, but the landscape was empty of all signs of a rider. "By the way," said the sheriff, "that bet we made a while back." "I forgot that. I don't bet that way." "I sure ain't going to be let off that easy," said Pete Gloucester generously. "I was getting to think that I knowed more 'n you, Sheriff, and I'm getting off cheap at $20 worth. Besides, why won't you bet?" "It don't pay, somehow," said the sheriff, "to win money out of the life of another man, even if he's a murderer."